Good morning, everyone. We are continuing with our study of the Ananda way of life through the guidelines of conduct for members of the Sevaka order. So today we're going to talk about the Sadhaka Vow, which I will explain all of this in just a moment, but first let's pray. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to fulfill our destiny as children of God, which is to realize our true nature and to rise into the light of your presence. Guide us that in every decision, in every moment, in every situation in life, we feel your guiding presence, that we may always be instruments of your divine love. Om. Peace. Amen. So, my friends, in this booklet we have 3 vows given. The Sevaka life vow, and then what is simply called the Sadhaka order vow. I called it the postulant vow, the novice vow, which is, an old title that's not used anymore. And then this one is for the Sadhaka. It says to be a Sadhaka in Ananda Sangha. The reason I'm laughing at all of this is there's a very strong comment by Jesus in the Bible when he is criticized for healing someone on the Sabbath. And Jesus answers back, if one of your sheep was lost in a ditch and it was the Sabbath day, wouldn't you pull the sheep out instead of leaving it there to die? And then he says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And what he means by that is all of these external practices and external ways of organizing are created in order to serve the single purpose, which is for human beings to elevate their consciousness. They don't have a value in and of themselves. Their value is how they affect human consciousness. Now, Ananda is now 50 years old, which is really not very long in the great scheme of things when you consider Master being an avatar and how the force of an avatar takes time to express, Swamiji being the one who helps pull together make practical the ideas that Master put out in this blaze of inspired light. So the Sevaka order and the Sadhaka order, which is now sort of being inserted into this conversation all of a sudden, were actually developed over the last, few decades by the people of Ananda as we began to perceive that there were certain needs. So it started with Swamiji realizing that he wanted to form in the center of the community a monastic core, a core of people who had the karmic freedom to join the army, so to speak, meaning to sacrifice a degree of self-determination in order to work as a group as needed in order to create what we were doing. And I've, in the course of this, much earlier, I don't need to reiterate all that, explained why he thought that was a good idea and how we went and followed it. So in the early 80s, which is when this book was first written, this Sevaka core, as a monastic order was formed. We became legally recognized by the Internal Revenue Service in the USA. And then ever since then, it's been the spiritual heart of the community. From a certain point of view, has been this monastic core. Then time passes, and we moved. I'm talking early 80s here. Ananda began to expand into other communities, other residential communities, teaching centers, urban centers. I've been part of this center here in Silicon Valley, which is, the first generation. We were among the first generation who were really moving out and making this happen. So we, in 1989, we started a residential community with the generous help of investors who wanted to help make the community and also have a safe place for their investment. And so we've worked together to have this community for all these years. And at the same time, we established a church, a temple, that also served, in addition to serving those who were able to live within the community, the temple serves a wider area, as a church does. And of the 500 or so people who have been regularly a part of the temple, only a small fraction of them actually also live in the community. Excuse me a moment here. And they, the ones who don't live in the community, it's not necessarily because they're less dedicated. It's simply that they may have family obligations, they may have career obligations, self-determined independence that is important for them to maintain. There can be all kinds of reasons other than the level of their dedication that cause them to live outside the community. A decision was made, and a right decision, that the Sevaka order requires residence in the community. But as Ananda developed beyond the boundaries of Ananda village, and this community was one of those that was pioneering this new reality, it became clear that we needed what is obviously, what the words for it are, we needed a lay order. And Swamiji had already started working with that because it was part of what Master did in SRF. There were the monastics, and they were, in that case, monks and nuns. There was no householder monastic order, which is what the Sevaka became. But there was the monks and nuns, and then there was what was called the lay disciple order, which was all of the church members and everybody else who was a disciple of Master but didn't have the karma to be a monk or a nun. So the lay disciple order existed there. Swami created essentially something we called the lay order, as opposed to the monastic order. And monastic used to be clearly defined by monk or nun. The lines get a little fuzzy once you have a householder order, but hey, we're in Dwapara Yuga. This is an age of energy where forms don't really matter. In the age of St. Francis, it was called the third order. There was the monks, the order for the monks, the orders for the nuns, and the third order. And to be a Franciscan, a member of the Franciscan third order, was a very serious spiritual commitment. It was not just sort of I don't have anything else to do, so this is what I'll do. If you were part of that Franciscan third order, you had committed yourself and defined yourself very definitely from the rest of society. Now that's many centuries ago, but it's the same principle that applies here. We have the Sevaka monastic order, and we have the Sadhaka lay order. At some point, the name was changed from lay order to Sadhaka order, which was an improvement in a certain way, but it also has led to endless confusion. Because sadhaka means dedicated to sadhana, sevaka means dedicated to service, and it's sort of hard to tell which is which. When you called it the monastic and the lay order, it was very clear what you were working with. Now, also what gradually began to happen over time is that as people moved to Ananda village, which is where these more complicated membership requirements tended to incubate and develop, people would move to Ananda village, and gradually folks began to realize that the first level of training would really be to train and become a member of the Sadhaka order. And then it would be like, after a time, after you'd become a member of the Sadhaka order, maybe the community would feel that you really had the right spirit and the karmic freedom. These are the words that you have to say all the time. The karmic freedom to be able to become a member of the Sevaka order. So the Sadhaka order became a feeder for the Sevaka order. Now, that was true at Ananda village, where it was geographically separate, where there was this huge bar that you had to cross even to arrive there, because it was remote from the way ordinary life takes place. You had to sever many ties in order to come there. You're living in this more isolated, self-contained environment. So sadhaka as a postulant order makes a great deal of sense. In the urban areas where I've always lived, sadhaka is clearly an end in itself, because you have people who are living in their own homes, carrying on their own lives with their own families and their own careers, and yet are deeply dedicated to Master's teaching, but they're never going to be resident in a community. But their dedication is demonstrably much more than just the person who comes to church every week. But they're not going to move from the sadhaka order into the sevaka order. So it's not really serving really just as a temporary holding pattern before you become a monastic. The sadhaka order has complete integrity on its own, and people have, in our community, been sadhaka members for 3 decades. Because they are members of Francis's third order. They live a certain life that makes being a monk or a nun, which even if you're a householder, we're still monastic, not appropriate. So keeping all of that straight, really, even among the leaders of Ananda, I can't tell you how many conversations I've been in about what the difference is, because in practical terms, and again, I say this in the community that I live in, some of our most dedicated members are the sadhaka members. So it isn't about how much you love God or how much you're willing to give to Master. It's just karmic freedom to be able to live in a community and have that little extra bit of being able to allow to a greater extent that the major decisions in my life are a community issue, not just a personal issue. Now, of course, with cooperative obedience, our own personal considerations are also part of the equation. So once again, all the lines get fuzzy. But just to say all of that, then we come to the Ananda Sadhaka order. And it begins, as the other 2 vows begin, by dedicating ourselves first to Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Great Masters Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and our Guru Paramahansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, we bow to you all. It's exactly the same. Then the next paragraph is also exactly the same. I offer my life, my service, and my devotion to God, to you, my line of gurus, and to the ray of divine light that you represent. So we're saying the same things that the Sevakas say. Every time I read that, I just love it. My life, my service, and my devotion. I offer it to God, to Guru, to God and to my line of gurus, and to the ray of divine light. I've repeated my thoughts about that so many times I won't say them again, but isn't it great? Isn't it just wonderful? I have come to Ananda to find thee, my God, and to serve thee in a spirit of love through my fellow man. So in this case, again, we're explaining, and it sort of gets a little bit of the Sevaka first vow and a little bit of the life vow by saying, I've come to Ananda. So this also explains, again, as I'm always trying to make these distinctions, the Sevaka order is that I wish to commit myself more deeply to what Swami Kriyananda and Ananda are doing. Even though Swami Kriyananda's name is not in any of these vows, at the time that they were written, the spiritual director of Ananda Sangha worldwide was Swami Kriyananda. So even though his name wasn't mentioned, we were committing ourselves to the vision of serving Master that Swamiji created. And even though the position has been passed to Swamiji's successor, who is Nayaswami Jyotish, what we're really committing ourselves to by committing to the position is we are saying that this ray of the divine light, which is represented by these gurus, this is how we're going to express it. Way back in the late 90s, when we had a big colony leaders meeting with Swamiji, community leaders meeting with Swami in Assisi. It was a group of the individuals, all of whom had responsibility for one of Ananda's communities somewhere. Swami was saying that one of the things he suggested was that whenever we are communicating with the public through our advertising or whatever, and that there is a picture of Master offered, Swami said there should also be a small picture of him. And he was not at all inclined toward pushing himself or his own position, but the reason he said was very simple. He said, over the years, increasingly, in the future, as the future unfolds, there will be many, many, many expressions of Master's work. And many different groups will be inspired, and truly inspired, by Master to pick up one thread or another, or just to be one unique family under Master's umbrella. And so it will be important for us to be able to say, which aspect, which expression of Master's teaching are we? Oh, we're the one. We're the Ananda Swami Kriyananda one. And so being a member of the Ananda Sadhaka order is also saying, in this vast universe of divine possibilities, I've been drawn to God, I've been drawn to these gurus, and I've been drawn to this particular expression. But then, Swami wants us really to understand, I have come to Ananda, okay, to find thee, my God, and to serve thee in a spirit of love through my fellow man. He never wants us to forget, even for a moment, what Ananda is. Why have I come here? I've come here to find God and to serve God in others. And if I think I've come for any other reason, I'm lonely, I want a tribe to belong to, I need to have an identity in this world. I mean, all of those things can be true, and all of those things can be collateral benefits of why we're part of Ananda. But I've come to Ananda to find God. And therefore, I have to ask myself, in everything that I do as part of Ananda, am I doing it in such a way that it enhances my fundamental commitment, which is to draw closer to God and to serve others? Then I say, I promise, as a sadhaka in Ananda Sangha, to do my best to live a life that is pleasing to God. So that's a line that doesn't appear anywhere else. This is just in the Sadhaka Vow. I promise to do my best to live a life that is pleasing to God. That's a very sweet way to put it, isn't it? This isn't, the life vow is, I surrender, I pledge myself, I promise to live a life in openness and surrender. This just says, I want to live a life that's pleasing to God. And part of it is a slightly different emphasis, but it's also using words that are appropriate. Now here you are, let's imagine a sadhaka member. Let's say I'm raising small children. Let's say I have a spouse who supports me but is not interested in this. I have responsibility perhaps for a business that I've helped to start. Maybe my aging parents are part of my life also. Maybe even my mother-in-law lives with me. We can have all these things. So I want to live a life that's pleasing to God. And you can see how gently that rests in the heart when there's so many demands. What would be a life that is pleasing to God? Well, you could say openness and surrender to God's will, but that could be, the words of that are more sharp-edged, which is quite appropriate for a life member of a monastic order. But for one who has to navigate many different flows of energy, to say, I promise to live a life that is pleasing to God, and then it says, in surrender to God's will, it's there also. I aspire, and then it says, anyway, I just love that. I want to think with that for a moment. Of course, it applies to all of us, to live a life that is pleasing to God. I'm remembering in this section when Swami had a test, an experience when he was a young monk, and he got involved with some people who turned out to be quite negative and made Swami feel that they were acting on behalf of Master, but really it was quite questionable as to what was motivating their actions. And eventually Master scolded Swami for his hot-headed negativity, because he'd burst into the office and sort of scolded this senior nun for not cooperating with Master's guidance. And then only afterwards did he realize that he really wasn't so sure about what Master's guidance actually was. And Swamiji castigated the whole group of them, but especially singled Swamiji out for castigation. "You young hotheads," is what Master said to them. And then later Swami said he met Dayamata, and there was some conversation about this little incident. And Daya said something to Swami, to the words to the effect of, "We're here to please Master, aren't we?" And then Swamiji just, that concept just went so deep into his heart. Yes, of course, I'm here to please Master. And of course, what goes along with that is that Master's pleasure is not whimsical. Master's pleasure is not egotistical. Pleasing Master means to live in harmony with what the Guru knows to be our own highest potential and the right road that will bring us there. So to live a life that's pleasing to God, well, what else are we doing here? At the end of this incarnation, what do we want to say? You know, that my business succeeded, my house had a beautiful garden, I made a great profit on the stock market. All of those things may be very useful and may be very, very nice to have done. But what will really matter in the end was my life pleasing to God? Did I choose those paths which were the paths that He wanted for me? There's something in the Bhagavad Gita where it says it's better to fail at your own dharma than to succeed in someone else's. Recently I received a kind of global criticism, which, you know, comes on us all the time, and was fully deserved. It wasn't that it was fully deserved. It wasn't deserved. It was appropriate, you know, perhaps haven't been behaving quite as well as I hoped I had. And it was interesting, my first response was, it's better to fail at my own dharma than to succeed at someone else's. And I really did mean it. You know, I'm doing what I know I'm supposed to do, and if I don't do it very well, that's probably why I'm being asked to do it. Otherwise, why would I be asked? A friend of mine came to me once, this was in the earlier years of my life here, and you know, I was finding my way in the position of responsibility that had been thrust upon me. And this man, in an attempt to help me, which actually did help me, he said basically that I really wasn't as good at my job as I should be. And I was so pleased. My immediate response was, do you think that if I knew how to do this job, I would still be doing it? Like, of course I'm learning. Why else would I bother? If I was already if I'd mastered everything this had to teach, then God would have pushed me to my next reality where I had to grow again. So to live a life that's pleasing to God is a very nice way to measure things, because it's entirely, are we growing spiritually? It has nothing at all to do with what it looks like from the outside. So I promise to live a life that's pleasing to God. And then it says, I aspire, which is also another wonderful word. I aspire to the best of my ability to live by the guidelines for conduct of members of the Ananda Sevaka order, which guide the spiritual life of Ananda's Sadhaka and Sevaka members. That's a lot of words. But in other words, we're supposed to study this booklet and live the Ananda way of life as far as it is applicable and as far as we are able. There may be cooperation with leadership in decision making that is not really practical if you have to answer also to many other people who do not share this same commitment. So, but nonetheless, one says, I aspire, which is my goal, the destiny I hold in front of me is to have the freedom to be able to conform to the Ananda way of life to the best of my abilities. So here, the Sadhaka Vow gives us a little more breathing room. I promise to live a life that is pleasing to God. I aspire to the best of my ability to be able to live by these guidelines. This is the difference between a monastic and a lay order. As a means of attaining self-realization, I offer my cooperation and my loyalty to Ananda. Now, the word that's missing here is obedience. I offer my cooperation, not my cooperative obedience, but just my cooperation. Now, cooperation can move to the level of obedience if, in one's own heart, that is pleasing to God for me to do that. But if I have commitment to many other people, I may not be able to. I have to also honor their realities, and honoring their realities is likely also to be pleasing to God. So, my loyalty to Ananda, to its members and its leadership, and above all to the living representative of the Ananda line of gurus, the spiritual director of Ananda Sangha worldwide. So we're loyal to our Guru Bhais, we're loyal to the leaders, but it doesn't spell it out like those who are responsible for leading the community in its various aspects, because this is a lay order, not a monastic order. So the monastic community doesn't control my life to the extent that it needs to if that's the vow you've taken. And it's not appropriate that the monastic community direct my life because I'm a member of a lay order. And none of this indicates anything about commitment. It just indicates the appropriate karma for you, your soul. You find yourself in a certain situation. It's not an accident. It's not that you made a wrong turn and a terrible mistake. No, it's exactly the life that is pleasing to God. Wife, mother, husband, father, business owner, daughter-in-law, mother-in-law, parent, all these different realities all have to be carried out. Master actually said the householder path is the higher path provided, and this is the wonderful, provided that one carries out one's duties with mental detachment. See, the monastic order, to an extent, separates you from those duties, can separate you from those duties. The lay order requires that you live the life that is pleasing to God in the midst of them. Guide me and strengthen me, Lord, in this my divine resolution to live always for Thee, exactly the same way that the Sevaka vow ends also. Guide me, because there are going to be lots of points where I have to make choices, and I need your guidance to know, and strengthen me, because my confusion will come from my fear and my weakness, and strengthen me so that I realize that the power to live rightly is the power of grace. Guide me and strengthen me. There's two beautiful words together, aren't they? Show me the path and then give me the courage and the ability to walk it. They're two different realities, which is why Swami puts them as two pieces here. You can stand knowing exactly what you're supposed to do, but you also need the strength to do it. Because to follow the divine way, to live a life that is pleasing to God, requires a disciplined willpower that comes only from the grace of God. In this, my divine resolution to live always for Thee. And thus the Sadhaka Vow ends. God bless you, my friend.